Hi, everyone. Welcome to our executive talk on helping remote workforces stay connected. My name is Paul Chapman. I'm the CIO at Box. Today, I'm joined by Anisha Vaswani, who's the corporate CIO at Box, Stephen Franchetti, who's the VP of Business Technology at Slack, Hector Aguilar, who is the President of Technology at Okta, and Gary Sorrentino, who's the CIO advisor at Zoom. Thanks for joining me, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here.
So these are unprecedented times in the world today as we come to grips with, grasping this new reality. Remote work is suddenly an overnight requirement, and very few organizations, I think, generally were feeling prepared. I've been sort of jesting a little bit, but it feels like we're being forced into the world's largest work from home experiment. And so far, it hasn't been easy for a lot of companies. And for some, unfortunately, it's also a wake-up call for organizations that may have placed too much focus on daily operational needs at the expense of maybe investing in a digital business architecture or a modern reference architecture, and some of the long-term resiliency plans. So today, we're going to spend some time digging into what we know is top of mind for every technology leader right now, and that's how are we helping our remote workforces stay connected. So I'll start with each of our respective companies here. It's clear the business landscape is facing unprecedented set of challenges, which is fueling a lot of change in how we think about technology and remote work. And certainly any service that involves communication exchange is seeing a significant increase in usage. So as technology leaders of companies whose services are in increased demand, what are some of the steps each of your companies is taking to support the reliability and scalability of your platforms? So maybe Gary, we'll start with Zoom, because I certainly know Zoom demand for Zoom services has significantly gone up in the last few weeks here.
Yeah, so capacity means a lot of things, right? We're looking at the way that people are logging in. We're looking at time zones. We're trying to offset data centers depending on east to west and west to east, but also looking at how we're staffing the help desk and how we're staffing and how we support people, our own staff around the globe. So I think it's a combination of, yes, of course, the technology was always set up to handle more load, and we continue to do that, but it's all the things that are around it. It makes no sense if it's up, but you can't support people. So I think it's to provide that service when volume surge is not just about the technology, but also thinking about support, the third parties that we work with, to send mails and things like that, the many applications that we connect to, they're part of the ecosystem, and they all need to be at the same way. So I think it's a joint effort across the firm to make sure that, of course, the Zoom platform stays standing, but all the support organizations around it do the same.
Yeah, agreed. Stephen, what about over at Slack?
Yeah, no, we've seen certainly a kind of massive explosion in the usage of Slack really over the past couple of weeks, and it's indiscriminate when it looks at the different types of customers, whether large customers or smaller organizations. So we've seen about 2 million of an increase in connected users over the last couple of weeks, which is phenomenal when you think about that. So it's definitely put a wrench in the works when it comes to any of the normal road mapping plans that we had in place. We've really had to turn our attention to how do we ensure that we're supporting the customer appropriately as job number one. But our first concern to do that is of course with our employees and making sure that they're in a good place so that they can in turn effectively support our customers. And the way we've approached it internally is really in this order. It's been take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and then ultimately take care of the work. And when you're working, bring your full attention to it. And if you need to take additional time off during the day, then that's totally understandable, given that you might have 3 kids at home and you're trying to share the kitchen table with your spouse doing video conferencing. And it's a really tough situation to be in. I know this from my own personal experience of having made the transition. But really, in addition to that, it's not just about the technical aspects of business continuity. It's really about how do you set your people up for success such that they can support the customer effectively.
Yeah, very interesting. And we're going to dive in a little bit on some of the cultural challenges and cultural considerations that we're now having to go through. To your point, technology is an enabler to enable people to work from anywhere. But then is the culture attuned, your organizational culture attuned to working in that style? Hector, what about what's going on at Okta?
You know, it's actually pretty interesting because one of the things that we're seeing is that because a lot of people are working from home now, typically people will create multi-factor authentication policies that do not apply when they are in the corporate office. So now that everybody's working from home, we're actually seeing a huge increase in multi-factor authentication requests. So that's kind of one piece that we're seeing. I think in the last 20 days, we grew like 30% in terms of like people trying to authenticate using MFA. So that's good because we're trying to keep kind of the bad guys out of the corporate resources. But another interesting thing that we kind of thought that we were going to see an increase, but we didn't think that it was going to be so massive, is SMS. You know, one of the things that you can do with Okta is to use SMS or voice factor to get your MFA. We're seeing a huge increase in that because there's a lot of people that just decide to use SMS for this. And right now we're actually seeing from the carriers that even globally, the carriers are having a problem because a lot of people are using more phones, a lot of people are using more SMSs. So things are actually getting saturated. So we have been doing a couple of things. One is working with our providers, obviously, to make sure that we know that the SMSs are arriving to the end user, but also monitoring, you know, and I'm sure like a lot of Zoom, Slack, Box, and ourselves, and Okta as well, we're actually increasing a lot of the monitoring that we're doing into the service, just to make sure that we have the right capacity, just to make sure that we are kind of like trying to get ahead of what is happening. And so we're seeing great data and a lot of usage of our platform, and especially in America.
Yeah, fascinating. And I know we'll touch on some of the security and risk aspects that we've seen that have emerged from various other conversations that we've had. It'd be good to get your perspective on that as well. Anisha.
Yeah. So with Box, I mean, you know, our mission is to power how the world works together in good times, but we certainly take it very seriously in times like this where we know customers are relying on us. So from a Box perspective, you know, the product and operations teams have been hyper focused on making sure the system and the service continues to be available and reliable. The other interesting thing I think we see is in times like this, unfortunately, in chaotic times, you see a lot of bad actors spin up and try and take advantage of the situation. So we're also making sure our customers are aware of some of the security capabilities we have in the product that can really help secure some of their content, some of their most critical content. And then I think, thirdly, you know, we want to take away the friction of from users who are trying to figure out how to use Box to now suddenly support 100% remote workforce. And so we've taken away friction in terms of overages and you know, having to deploy seats so that people are just able to get their work done in this environment. And so we're hyper focused on just supporting our customers and making sure they're successful as they transition very rapidly, in some cases, to having to support a completely remote workforce.
Yeah, and I think that that's certainly something that when you say rapidly or quickly, I remember just 3 weeks ago, I was having conversations with some other technology leaders, and we were talking about what looked like this sort of creeping up on us, working from home that we might have to do for a particular office or something. You could just sort of see it was creeping that way. And we were doing A/B testing on our network operations center, our security incident response center. We even made the suggestion that maybe one day the following week we would close down an office and see what would happen when everybody worked from home, how we would function and be productive. And I think literally within 96 hours of that, we'd shut down our London office, we'd shut down our Japan office, we'd shut down our New York office, and then 24 hours after that, we'd shut down our main headquarters. And so it went from being proactive to reactive. And I know many other companies that were working on making sure they had capacity. I've spoken to a number of customers that are companies that they may have had a remote work policy in place for a subset or ad hoc set of employees. So they might be a 5,000 person company, and they had maybe capacity to handle 500 people working remotely, and overnight they had to go to 5,000 people working remotely. So I'm you know, at Box, and I'm sure, you know, similar to your companies, you know, we're all sort of born in the cloud, growing up digital companies. So we have a sort of modern architecture that allows our services to be almost a work from anywhere, any place, any time. But have you been spending time with with customers and other technology leaders, and maybe in you know, we have different blind spots inside our own organizations. What considerations for enabling remote work quickly? You know, what have you learned as far as how well prepared you were, and maybe how well you've prepared some companies that you've been talking to were? Maybe Stephen, you want to?
If you don't mind, I'll just jump in. At Zoom, so at Zoom,
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
we mostly worked from home. So from us, it was kind of easier because we had the platform, and to send people home was a little bit easier because traditionally a lot of people work from home all the time. But to that point, we've been talking to people for the last 6 or 8 months about that new virtual worker and how to make the new millennials and Gen Zs happy at work. And a lot of that was they want to work from anywhere at any time and be productive. And then overnight, they're working from anywhere, anytime, and they're being productive. And so that whole culture got thrown upon us as we were trying to meet this demographics maybe halfway. And you're absolutely right what you said. Most companies we saw, they're prepared for what I call remote access. That is Sunday night, everybody's doing mail, right? Monday morning, I got to come in late because the kid I need to go to school or something like that. Maybe take a semi-sick day home or something like that, or work from home. All of a sudden, we went from that work from home community to those virtual workers, where 100% of what they do has to be done from home. And we've been working with companies just all over the world on how to support that. There is no one at the office to call up and say, hey, I'm home. Can you print this for me? Right? No, I'm home. I need to figure out how to do that. And so that whole trying to figure out where the new culture was going, this is a great test for the new culture.
Yeah. Stephen, what about over at Slack? You know, one of the things, you know, we're sort of, I guess, in some ways, we're a little insulated from some of the complexities that manufacturing and physical supply chain companies have. But I've been talking to a lot of those companies and getting a lot of different feedback. But we are finding that even in organizations like ours, where the virtual supply chain still can have some weakness in it. I mean, we uncovered that one of our third-party offshore providers that does a certain set of business services for us, they work in what we call a clean room environment, and that's a very controlled workspace. And when that environment closes down, it's not a case of just working from home, because the clean room environment that they work in today, or clean office environment they work in today, breaks, and that could potentially create risk or security challenges for us. So having to think through that has been something that kind of caught us a little bit by surprise. We hadn't thought through all of the sort of partners and sort of sub-processors and things like that. Is anything, Stephen, you're running into over there on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's good news, and there's certainly a set of challenges. I think the sheer velocity that we were all thrown into this took us all by surprise. And I know you were telling your story about Box. We had a similar story at Slack, where we were planning for something like this, but you never really know what it's going to be like until you step into it. And this one hit really, really fast. So it's certainly unprecedented. I think the first consideration to your earlier thought is reducing the friction for employees is number one as we transition to working remotely, and as much as possible make their experience as consistent as possible regardless of where they work from, whether they're working from the corporate office or working from home or even on their mobile device for that matter. And so our philosophy really focuses on, as you called it, that modern architecture. We have very much a cafe or sort of zero trust model in place with our architecture. So you don't have to log on to a VPN to get into the corporate network to access the tools you need. And we're seeing more, companies move away from the sort of traditional firewalled off networks, which create a lot of friction for remote workers, clearly. And then it's about the systems and technologies that you choose to run your business. And of course, for us, we're choosing SaaS partners like Zoom, Okta, and Box that provide that seamless experience regardless of where you're using the service from. So with that, it's kind of this sort of central design principle. I mean, clearly there's other challenges outside of that. The actual shift to working at home has been relatively smooth for our employees. But you talk about some of the supply chain issues. Laptops is the classic one, delivering laptops depending on where you are in the world, potential supply chain issues and logistics issues associated with that. So we've certainly seen some of that. And certainly with our customers, if you're a company that's been heavily reliant on perhaps the legacy architecture, your culture is about email and in-person meetings to run things, then you're in a much tougher spot to make this transition. It's just going to be much more difficult to make the transition to remote working.
Yeah, certainly that's been made some companies nervous, is that they may not have grown up in a work from anywhere type of culture.
Right.
And you can speed some things up. You can deploy technologies that allow you to sort of work in a remote fashion, but you can't accelerate at least at any comfortable pace the cultural change aspect. So what probably could take a couple of years to roll out at a sort of balanced pace is now having to be done in sort of weeks. And that's what, in fact, I'm finding technology organizations as a function are actually sort of reasonably comfortable working this way. But the HR organization that's used to onboarding people in a physical manner, that's used to, handling physical, I-9 documents and things like that. It's definitely a lot of challenges there. Hector, what about over at Okta? What's going on there in that regard?
I think we're all very lucky that we work for kind of almost next generation companies that are basically cloud friendly, born in the cloud. Because I mean, we've never had a single server at Okta that was used for production, right? I mean, we've always been kind of really supporting Okta remotely, right? And so engineering actually we have a no meeting day on Thursdays. And so most people actually work from home on Thursdays, but it's kind of a very different thing to work one day where you're not going to have meetings versus having to work all week with like a ton of meetings using Zoom, and then communicating via Slack and accessing files via Box. It's definitely an adjustment. I think for engineering, it's not so much of a big change, but you're right. I mean, there's people like, I don't want to say other organizations or other inside of Okta, but yeah, where you would send them a Slack message and they would reply via email, and that has to change. So culturally, I think it's part of the technology is there. And I think, again, we were very lucky that, we have Okta connecting everything. We have Slack, we have Box, we have Zoom. So the technology is there, but it is still an adjustment, even when you have like, I don't know, 10 meetings in a day, and you're moving from room to room, maybe kind of going, walking a little bit, that's actually good for you versus sitting in a room, like with 10 hours of Zoom conference. That's actually takes a toll on you. And so we have been asking people to just finish meetings like 5 minutes before the hour so that they can actually just walk around, just like drink something or move, because it was definitely an adjustment, even for engineering that, I mean, we used to work from home at least one day a week is different. And the cultural thing, the cultural aspect of you have the technology, but you need to make sure that you train your users to use it. Even little things like, how do you start a Zoom and how do you kind of customize your background, and all of those things that are just important to make sure that people stay connected. And we've been doing a lot of virtual kind of happy hours and virtual meetings, virtual hallway conversations, just so that people keep that kind of engagement that you need. And it's funny how much you miss it after like 2 weeks of just solely working from home.
Yeah, there's a question that came in into the chat here around hints, tips, and tricks. And so I think we'll definitely start to share some of those in a few here. One of the things you talk about in sort of keeping people socially connected, we've seen everything from people showing what they're making for lunch to taking meetings on their Peloton. I heard there's now we have a work from home hacks Slack channel, and people have shared how you can hack your Peloton to actually conduct a Zoom meeting on the Peloton screen. Really? I've been using my iPad and iPhone, but apparently you can hack the actual Peloton. I don't know what that does to your warranty. But there's also there's lots of different things going on there. And Anisha, maybe you could share a little bit, because as Hector was talking about moving from room to room, we have actually seen an increase in break fix requests
Yeah.
So maybe share a little bit about
that's
what's
sort
going
of
on.
one of the unintended consequences of this accelerated working from home. We definitely, to the point of, having a physical supply chain, I think Steve mentioned this, one of the things you do have to think about is what do you do about break fix and laptop requests and onboarding people, and how do you deal with that? And one of the interesting things we've seen is an increase in break fix requests, and lots of people being super apologetic. I was helping my child and dropped the laptop and I had it on the coffee table and spilled coffee. And so, we are trying to figure out we are definitely seeing an increase in break fix volume just because people have less than ideal setups at home, right? And there's just more opportunity to break things. And we are looking at how do we move more of that support entirely remote. And, I think to the point that I think Gary made and Hector made and Steve made, I think we're all fortunate that we work for very digitally native companies, and sort of the IT decisions around being cloud first and cloud native seem particularly prescient at this point in time in terms of, supporting this moment and working from home. And then you have to figure out some of these edge cases like break fix, and how do you resolve that going forward.
And I would add on top of that, one of the challenges is right now is unless companies have built up sort of a surplus or an inventory of laptops or devices for your employees, because we're still hiring new people, right? We haven't stopped our hiring necessarily, and so we still have to onboard. And I know that a lot of companies sort of have these dwindling inventories of laptops and are now struggling to actually procure, new inventory. So you've got this sort of little bit of a double whammy of work from home, creating a higher probability of laptops breaking and so on, at the same time as dwindling or restricted access to inventory. So definitely a number of companies working through that.
Yeah, even for some companies, like even for us, like the physicality of shipping laptops kind of becomes a problem. One thing that happened to us as well, even in development, we said, we always work from home, we should be okay. But we found out that, well, we knew it, but there are some devices like mobile devices where we test our mobile app that, they're not virtual, they were in the office. So we actually had to take those devices out of the office and put in developers' house so that it could actually can test like the physical device, the physical iPhone or physical Android. So even for companies like us, there's still some physicality that you need to deal with.
Well, one of the companies we're working with, on the way out, when they told people, you're not coming back to work on Monday, they told them to take their monitors.
Yeah,
They walked out of the building with a monitor, and they said, take it home, right? And that was it. But I do appreciate what we said about the break fix, because even in our own company, we're becoming tech support for every router in the world. Yeah. It's kind of crazy, right?
Oh, that's right. That's right. The Fix My Comcast.
And it's always been that people who have been even on these kind of sessions or in big meetings, like even large webinars with speakers, are on Wi-Fi. And the Wi-Fi will stall at home because maybe the kid starts downloading, a Netflix high def movie, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden, Dad's Zoom, as he's presenting to his 30,000 employees, freezes and things like that, or bombs.
It's a good point. I actually I started using the term the Box IT Geek Squad, because we're actually feel like we're doing this B2C model of, as we run into experiences like this, we're helping people tune their home network, their ISP, and it's like, yes, you've got 50 video cameras and 3 other Zoom conferences going on and a bunch of Netflix streaming. It's like, you're going to have challenges. So those types of best practices are emerging as well, for sure. Yeah. It's actually, I will, quick funny story. I was actually on a conference the other day, Zoom meeting the other morning, and my daughter came into my 16-year-old came into my office. Of course, no comprehension that I might be already on a Zoom call. And she's like, Dad, have you seen the charger for my laptop? I need to get on a Zoom call for school. I'm like, hey, welcome to the 200 people I'm on a Zoom call with right now. The world we live in. But I'll share one other thing that I had a little bit of a blind spot to early on that I've now closed. And that is, we talk a lot about sort of the people working from home and the home environments having other distractions, whether that's pets barking or kids running around or spouses working in the room next door. But we also have a sizable population of employees that actually live alone. They're single, they live in a single, an apartment by themselves. And, loneliness is a real thing, right? And making sure that we're doing extra reach outs and
Yes.
extra connecting with individuals that might be living alone at a time like this is extra important as well. So just another tip that I picked up along the way.
Absolutely.
Well, we've seen a lot of people do like happy hours.
Yeah, I was just going to
Myself,
say that. Yeah.
Me and my friends, we used to meet in New York, for a glass of red wine. And we decided that we moved those to Zoom. And every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock, bring your own, right? And so we've seen a lot of those. Zoom started doing open mics. We just start these big webinars, and anybody who works for Zoom can get on and just talk about anything that they want, just for some of the people who are single and at home.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think that's super important. The point about, well, we're using all these technologies to enable work for sure, but it is also a way to ensure, checking in and ensure well-being and also continuing to create community and culture, right? We've done that through Slack and all our fun channels. We have the work from home lunch, and who knew Boxers were this creative about the lunches they make, but there's been some super creative things there, whether it's the remote work from home hacks channel, whether it's the virtual, Paul's hosting a virtual bring your own beverage meeting today, in fact, to do exactly that, right? And so it's certainly an enabler, not just of work, but also of continuing to maintain community and culture, I think, at work.
And
What we did.
people
what
are
we
getting
did-
super creative. I got to tell you, I was on one call the other day at 11:30, Uber Eats. They sent me a voucher. I ordered, and lunch came at the time lunch came for everybody else. It was actually pretty cool. Right?
Yeah, I think Okta
How to be
just,
creative, right?
yeah, I think Okta for your upcoming conference actually sent out something similar to conference attendees, that there's a Grubhub or something.
Right. This was a conference, actually, right?
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Another thing that we did is we did a virtual happy hour where it's like bring your own drink, but also we did a little bit of a contest with Zoom, and we said, okay, best background. And so people got super creative. They had props, and then we picked kind of the top 10, and then we actually did a poll on Slack, and so people could vote to see who was getting the award, and that was super fun. And it's it definitely helps, get people connected. So we're planning on doing it probably every other week.
Awesome. Well, talking of super fun, let's transition to security and risk.
Oh boy.
So I'm sure this is something that we've all experienced and are experiencing, especially our customers are experiencing this, is that responding to a crisis does not mean, security threats are any less pervasive than they ordinarily are. In fact, we've seen an uptick in COVID-19 malware attacks using bogus news articles, malicious emails, fake real-time COVID-19 maps, things like that. And actually, we were just, as I mentioned earlier, looking at some statistics that we've gathered now over the last few weeks, and we have seen a significant increase in malware attacks and spamming. Of course, everybody's spamming on their COVID-19 stuff, and we're definitely seeing a huge rise in sort of inbound email and a rise in emails that we're blocking. So this is where having services like sort of Malwarebytes, Proofpoint, things like that are very important at times like this. And so it'd be interesting to know from the panelists, anything you're doing differently or need to do anything that is different in regards to security and risk. We obviously, all of our companies maintain a very high bar for security and risk posture. And to the point earlier where we talked about companies moving very quickly, I think that if as companies deploy or look to modernize their architecture to allow this work from home environment, if you don't think through the architecture correctly, then you can create actually a lot of holes in your environment. And actually, it was interesting, Hector, when you're talking about multi-factor authentication, Stephen, it's a good example of where, as companies roll out Slack and Box, we highly recommend, almost make it mandatory, that they should turn on the native integration between the two services so that you maintain security integrity with who has access to what across those two services. This is where the best of breed and the interoperability of our architecture really starts to pay off, because you're at the same time as enabling quickly, you're not creating these security risks. So anybody want to take a run at what each of you are doing there?
Well,
maybe start with Hector.
Yeah, certainly multi-factor authentication. We're actually, I think we even have kind of a page where, you know, any company that wants to enable right now multi-factor authentication and Okta can do it for free. Because we do believe that multi-factor authentication is going to be super important right now during these times. As you're saying, we're seeing way more phishing attacks and people taking advantage of this situation. And, you know, multi-factor authentication, and if you train your users to use it properly and you have your good policies, it's pretty effective. It's pretty effective, especially in these times where, you know, we have a feature called Threat Insights that is just looking at your IP addresses and where you're coming from and where you're not coming from. Even in these times, you know, the machine learning, it's going to automatically learn what your IP address is for your house, and it's going to know that it's a good kind of low risk attempt versus all of these attempts that we're seeing from random IP addresses all over the world. So, I mean, our recommendation is definitely multi-factor authentication, definitely having policies where you can have multiple of these, and to improve at least the authentication to these services.
Yeah, and I would agree with that from a Slack perspective. I don't think we're doing anything differently. I just think there's, based on the increased phishing attacks and security potential threats, there's more scrutiny around, you know, what's going on right now. So I think about our security and risk organization really using Slack to effectively keep abreast of all the things that are going on, all the potential threats that we have, being able to respond to those quickly, sort of spin up Zoom meetings from Slack, again, coming back to the integrations if they need to get in a war room to be able to address that. So the integrations have become really important. You know, if I think about the sort of levels of security we have in the product itself, it really doesn't vary based on the free plan that we're pushing out there. It has the same level of enterprise grade security. We do have advanced features when it comes into you know, enterprise key management and things of that nature to help with data protection, identity and device management, and those types of things. So I don't think it's anything particularly different based on the architecture that we have in play today. It's just more sort of agile and focus, I would say, on the risk that's going on right now.
Yeah, Anisha, what about
from a Box perspective, I think two things. From a customer-facing perspective, we want to make sure customers are aware of all the security capabilities in the product and using them to its full advantage, right?
Yep.
Things like Shield that are available to really secure your content. And the thing that Paul mentioned, which is architecting these best of breed solutions with leveraging the native integration, so you're using them appropriately, so you have chain of control and custody for your content, for example, at all times, no matter where you're surfacing it or using it. I think from an employee perspective, the other thing we're really focused on is, to Steve's point, it's not anything different or new, but heightened awareness, right? So we're continuing to make sure our employees stay diligent, we're communicating the fact that we are seeing an increase in phishing attacks. And then obviously you have the underlying sort of technology underpinnings to catch a lot of these things that we continue to employ. But I think communicating this both to customers and employees has been a pretty important thing for us as well.
Yeah, I think I got to parrot what you said also about teaching especially our clients, all the security tools that are built into our products, because most of the time they don't use them. At the end of the day, you know, they'll, especially when they're inside the four walls, right? They tend to not think about things like, why do I need a password on my Zoom call, right? Why can't I use the same Zoom number and why would I get a random number and things like that? I also think that as I'm working with a lot of companies, ours included, is you can't stop training your employees just because they're home. And that phishing test still need to go on. And, you know, I know everybody backed off in the first week because they didn't want to give employees like trainings and things like that, but they are a little bit on their own. And so they still need the trainings, and the current environment has changed. Being a prior CISO, also the current way that hackers are looking at employees working from home has greatly changed the landscape. And so it's not even a matter about the training you gave them 6 weeks ago. That training needs to be revamped. Right. And now you need to go out to them and you need to let them know the world has kind of changed. And I think also we're probably seeing a mix of people who are now doing business on their personal devices. Like, they could be on a Zoom call, but they could be using their regular cellular SMS to chat to someone rather than using something built into the tool, which is a lot more secure because they're, you know, that whole multitasking word gets in there. And so I think, you know, just training them, the common sense is where it comes from first. But training them on the new threats and how to use the products we put out there in the best possible way.
It's a really great point. I mean, there's a compounding effect of just additional stressors that are going on in people's environments anyway, right? The concern over COVID, the concern over, you know, what's going on in the family environment. You know, there's lots and lots of stressors that are on top of, you know, piling in on top, and then it's an opportunity for the bad actors to find ways to exploit. Definitely keeping the organization alert and aware, educated. We've been doing the same things, Gary. You know, as part of our formal communication, we have, you know, a consistent message around sort of where you can go for the FAQ and also the things to be aware of when it comes to, you know, bad actors. And we haven't stopped our own internal, you know, we have our own red team that does phishing attacks. The only thing we did is we didn't use COVID-19 as a phishing attack ourselves. We felt that was definitely probably not
too low. That's too low.
That's too low. Yeah, I said that. I said that's kind of a low blow. Let's not go there. But tax season is upon us. Maybe that's when we we can use. So
or just work from home tips, right? That's always a good.
We have that as well. Yep.
Work from home tips is everyone's clicking on that.
We have a good,
I think. Yep. I do believe it's also an opportunity as IT professionals for us to actually look at the settings of all of these collaboration tools that we use and ensure that they are secure by default.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because definitely not any of the companies that we're talking here, but there are other services that are insecure by default. And you need to basically look at really all of the settings to make sure that by default, you're not allowing, external people accessing your files or external people connecting to your conversations, because that we've seen that and we have to take special care right now about those settings, because there are ways to make it secure by default, but not all companies choose to do that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. It's like, if you're going to turn on Slack, then turn on Slack with the Box, turn it on with the native integrations. Correct. Because the security handshake is there between the two services. It's sort of like the architecture led part of the conversation, not just turning on services, right?
Exactly.
So the problem is the IT organizations who have newly adopted some of our technologies, they pushed it out before they really understood it. You know, there was no POC anymore. It was, hey, I need this. Let's get it out there. And the proof of concept is in the production right now. And so they didn't really learn how to use our product securely at the beginning.
Yeah, that was my point. I think it's definitely the speed now has created potential security risk. So, so a couple of things. I know we're sort of getting closer to the end of our time. So one of the other questions that came in here was in terms of talking to other CIOs, other customers that you've spoken to, either big or small. Which ones are doing remote work well? And have you learned sort of any key takeaways that other companies are that was one of the questions that somebody asked. So anybody want to take a run at that?
We had a large webinar the other day, and I asked one of the polling questions about how many people are working remote right now? 96%. How many people, these are CIOs, how many people felt they were prepared to move to remote workers? Over 90%. I kind of challenged that. Because a lot of people clicked yes to that. A lot of people felt that they were ready for this. I just don't
feeling prepared.
Yeah, I got it. I don't. And I also said from it was all CIOs, and you mentioned CIOs. From the CIO perspective, I think they were prepared. But if we had asked that question to the end users, I don't know if we would have got the same answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing from our perspective when I talk to our customers is the ones that I think have made the transition successfully are thankful that they have an architecture that they can rely on to make that transition. But even where they've had challenges around that, it's trying to, as much as possible, humanize the whole experience. So it comes back to the kind of cultural aspect again. How do you actually replace that sense of connectedness when everyone's in a separate location? So I'll give you an example. As a leading game developer, there's about 4,000 employees that shall remain nameless, but their CEOs and their execs are sharing daily updates, and they're doing through Slack. They've created channels not only around COVID, but also tips and tricks around working from home, and parents channels. They've got the kind of water cooler channels going on for people to try and recreate that sense of connectedness that might be missing right now. One of the things we've seen in some of the other customers, though, this is pretty natural, is because there's not that physical connectedness that you get in the office. We're finding, of course, that people are using Zoom much more, but that creates a challenge in and of itself because you have to schedule time with people, and all of a sudden you find yourself on 10 hours of Zoom meetings on a daily basis. So what we've tried to do is advise people to kind of back off those non-essential meetings. I think that the virtual happy hours are great, and those kind of drop-in connected, more social types of things. But as much as you can do in kind of a synchronous but disconnected fashion, where you don't have to actually see the person, have a physical conversation through Slack channels, through using Box, through using the tools that are available to you, I think it becomes a much more efficient and effective way of working as people start to set into this kind of new norm.
Yeah, it's a really good point. For some reason, it just feels like my days are really long. And
Yeah.
I'm sat in front of my screen more than I ever was before, and I have to be conscientious myself of breaking free of that. You know, it's like I got up yesterday and I'm like, oh, my butt is dead. I'm not used to sitting down this amount of time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. What a question? This has come up before in some of the conversations I've had around because we move so quickly. I think Gary, you mentioned taking monitors home, and I've heard, you know, like at Box, they're all on arms. You need screwdrivers, and that doesn't really work too well. And you know, I actually use Sidecar, so which comes with the new Mac OS. So I actually have my iPad is actually my second monitor. Lots of sort of work from home hacks like that. A lot of companies are talking about or have or providing a stipend for people to be able to work from home. Is that something that you've adopted at your respective companies? And we're not talking thousands of dollars, you know, we're talking, you know, a few $100 permission to go spend an expense to get some of the more sort of needed work from home peripherals or so on. Is that something that your companies are doing?
At Zoom, I know I'm probably the newest employee. I started like 6 months ago, and I got a whole work at home kit. So as soon as you become an employee, you get a whole work at home kit. It includes camera, keyboard, everything you need to work at home. So for our point, everyone gets one of those. So it actually works out really well to work from home. But it is part of the fabric. But you're absolutely right. I worked with the companies the other day, and they were thinking of like a $500 stipend or things like that. You know, the executive levels that we normally deal with, they just send equipment home to them, right? But at the employee level, they're thinking of a stipend.
And we provide kind of a work from home sort of basic setup as well, webcams and things of that nature. What we found though is spending 10 hours a day on meetings at home. You want to make the physical environment for the employee, which is the other consideration, as comfortable as possible. So we have actually offered up a $500 stipend for people to, you know, buy a desk, stand desk, or wherever makes them comfortable, a nice chair with their physical environment, as well as making sure they have the technology that they need.
Yeah, similarly at Box, I mean, we did decide to do a stipend as well, and it was the needs are varied, right? Some people need a desk or a proper chair. Some people, depending on the work they do, really wanted a bigger monitor than trying to look at a laptop screen. So we've done something similar just to make sure people are set up for being able to work from home for a protracted period of time.
Yeah. So, you know, the reality is that we do have offices, but, you know, I think we're all open to having people work from home and remote employees. So we were kind of in the middle of kind of trying to support more the dynamic work environment where, you know, by default, people are going to be working from home. But during these times, yeah, I mean, you can expense your monitor and we'll pay for it. That's fine at Okta. But one interesting thing is that there's different setups between different teams, because obviously the technical operations team, they're used to like having 3 monitors and the super expensive keyboard and nice ergonomic mouse. So we're basically also kind of prioritize whatever the technical operations team needs, including even kind of machines or anything that they need just to be productive during these times, as if they were in the office.
Yeah, and I think this is certainly something that's come up as part of a number of conversations I've had. When we say at these times, we don't know how long this is actually going to go on for, right? This could be weeks, this could be months, this could be weeks, and then there's a break, and then we have to go back to this situation again. And how prepared are we? What have we learned, and so on from each of these, you know, during this period? And, you know, to your point, we shouldn't be looking at short-term Band-Aid investments here. These need to be. I've known some, you know, I've been talking to some CIOs that have said, look, something that's really important to them right now is that vendors or partners are actually being real partners. This isn't an opportunity to hold people to ransom or to sell more. This is really about, look, we're all in this together. And we're all looking for the mutually beneficial outcome here. And the interesting thing is there are some services that I've heard, none of them on this call right now, but that have been having some stability issues, and we have to be able to trust in these services at times like this. And when the dust settles, some of them are saying, look, we're considering moving away from this service because it just wasn't reliable enough for us during this period of time. We've actually been in pretty good shape ourselves at Box, but one thing I know, Anisha, we've been doing is actually looking at all of our service providers and making sure that they are going to be financially viable through this period, which could go on for some period of time, right? There's a lot of things we have to do about sort of looking into the future. So any inputs on that, Anisha, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well. I mean, this is looking not just in the immediate term, but in the mid or long term. We recognize, I mean, just look at the unemployment numbers, right? The graph looks ridiculous today. It went from like an average of 395K unemployment claims to like 3.5 million in a week. So you're going to see an economic fallout out of that. And one of the things we want to make sure is we do have a best of breed, our architecture. We use a lot of service providers especially in our business systems environment. And we want to make sure we understand their viability, their stability. Technically, knock on wood, we haven't had issues, but just want to make sure. So we are doing an assessment and just making sure we double click on any provider or vendor, if they tend to be on the smaller side, or we don't know enough about them at this point. So we're definitely doing that right now.
Yeah, from our side, we use a lot of services just to keep kind of the service running. We have monitoring services, we have kind of global monitoring stuff that is basically additional services that we use. We try to have at least 2 providers for everything. So we're kind of like, at least we have kind of backup providers for everything, but that's basically for our core service. For everything else that the company is using, yeah, we're going through that analysis of like what companies could be in trouble, because there is a lot of services that we use, especially as a cloud-friendly company. I mean, we all have like hundreds of applications that people are using just to keep the service running. Not the service, but the actual business running. Applications that are connecting, I don't know, Marketo to NetSuite or NetSuite to whatever, and all of those services, we're basically looking at how to look at that to make sure that we're ready. But again, we put that in 2 buckets, the services that we need to keep the Okta service running in 1 bucket, and then everything else to run the business. And we're looking at that.
Yeah.
It's scary times.
We need to look across, because look, some of this might be the new norm.
Yep.
Right? I mean, I don't think we're just going to get to one day where we say, everybody go back to work, and everybody's going to say, I'm going back. A lot of the jobs that are now at home could stay home, and probably will stay home. Right? Yeah. And so the new norm means will the vendors we deal with and continue through that new norm.
Yeah, and I think ultimately there's going to be goodness that comes out of this as well. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an incredibly challenging situation that we've been forced into in like a really short time frame. And I think managing risk and looking at your vendors and partners. But I think the goodness will be around how we actually improve the way we work in the future. I always go back to the ride sharing analogy. So if you're in a city that has a ride sharing service like Uber or Lyft, it's likely never in your life are you going to go back and call a cab company on the telephone and verbally tell them your address and then wait an indeterminate amount of time until they come to your place and then ultimately pay them cash at the end of the ride, right? There just becomes a point where it's so much more convenient to use the rideshare app on your phone. And I think ultimately that's what's going to happen at the end of this. We'll take some of the techniques and the tools that we've learned from working remotely and then apply them to improving the way we work going forward, even when we go back to our corporate offices, regardless of where you work.
And those beliefs that we can't be productive at home, we're proving now. People are productive at home, right? The part about you can't be secure at home, well, we're proving we can be secure at home too, and things like that. But we did a session today about working great from home, and people have actually figured out ways to retool their jobs to be remote.
In a very short period of time as well.
In a very short period, out of necessity, right?
Exactly.
So they've retooled the way they do things, and some of the rules have relaxed. Like even here in the United States, you can now sign some documents over different transports and things like that, which you couldn't do before, right? Because there was some rule that said you couldn't do it. What is it? Isn't it the first time? Is it the Senate or the House that's going to vote video or vote audio for the first time? Things like that. So there's rules that and we're challenging now. And so I agree. We are changing for the better, right?
Yeah.
Reason
We're
was really
basically,
bad, but we are changing for the better.
basically
Yeah,
never getting back to normal, because the normal is going to change.
The normal's
Yeah,
going to change.
That's right.
It'll definitely accelerate more digital,
Absolutely.
digital experiences, because getting a wet signature in an environment like this is really hard.
Right.
So yeah, social distancing is a lot harder to do when you have to give someone a piece of paper and a pen and say, please sign this, right? This has been great. I mean, I really appreciate the wisdom and the insights and perspectives shared by the group here. I'm always been a big believer in the wisdom of our technology community, and anytime we can bring leaders together, it's a great opportunity for us all to learn and share and collaborate with one another. So I wanted to thank our executive panelists today for sharing their perspectives, valuable insights. I know especially at times like this, it's very much appreciated, because I know we're all super busy making sure that our organizations are running and so on. So hopefully the audience will find some nuggets of value in this conversation. So thank you for joining today. Be safe, everyone, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.